My name is Evelyn, and the moment my own daughter laughed at me, something inside me quietly broke. It happened in a room that smelled like polished wood and expensive leather, a place meant for serious conversations, for dignity, for family matters handled with care. Instead, it became a stage where I realized I no longer had a family in the way I once believed. I sat at the long table, my hands folded neatly in my lap, watching them. My children, three people I had carried, raised, sacrificed everything for. They didn't look at me the way they used to. There was no warmth, no curiosity, only impatience. "Can we just move this along?" my youngest said, tapping her fingers against the table. "We all have things to do." I nodded slightly, as if I understood, as if I hadn't spent weeks preparing for this exact moment. The lawyer cleared his throat and began listing what I had decided to disclose. A house, some savings, a modest pension. Nothing impressive, nothing that matched the expectations quietly growing in their eyes. I watched their reactions carefully. First came confusion, then disappointment, then something uglier. "That's it," my oldest son muttered, leaning back in his chair. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence sit there, heavy and uncomfortable. I wanted to see how far they would go. They didn't disappoint. "What about the other stuff?" my daughter asked sharply. "All those investments Dad used to talk about? The properties?" I gave a small, almost tired smile. "Your father liked to exaggerate," I said calmly. "What you hear now is what exists." That was the moment everything shifted. The air in the room changed. Respect, whatever little remained, vanished completely. And then she said it. "So, what do you even need money for?" my daughter snapped, throwing her hands up. "You're basically at the end anyway." For a second, no one spoke. Then someone chuckled. Then another. And suddenly the room filled with laughter. Not awkward laughter. Not nervous laughter. Real laughter. At me. I didn't react outwardly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. But inside, something went very, very quiet. I looked at them, really looked. At their faces, their expressions, the way they avoided my eyes while still smiling. Even my grandson, barely grown, smirked as if this was all perfectly normal. In that moment, I understood something I had refused to accept for years. They didn't see me as a person anymore. Just an inconvenience. A waiting game. A countdown. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. "Perhaps we should take a break." "No," I said softly. My voice surprised even me. It was steady, controlled. "We'll finish this." The laughter faded, but the damage remained, hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. I reached into my bag slowly. My fingers brushed against the envelope I had carried with me. Sealed. Prepared. Waiting. For years, I had imagined this moment differently. I thought there would be love, maybe gratitude, at least a little respect. Instead, I got honesty. Cruel, unfiltered honesty. And strangely, that made things easier. I placed the envelope on the table. The sound was soft, but it cut through the silence instantly. All eyes shifted to it. "What's that?" my son asked, his tone suddenly cautious. I leaned back slightly, studying them the same way they had studied me minutes earlier. "It's something I've been meaning to share," I said. I could see it happening in real time, the shift in their expressions. Curiosity replacing arrogance. Calculation creeping back in. Hope. It almost made me smile. "You said something interesting," I continued, looking directly at my daughter. "About me being at the end." She looked away. "I've had a lot of time to think," I went on. "About life. About choices. About what people reveal when they think nothing is at stake." No one interrupted me now. No one laughed. I placed my hand gently on the envelope. You see, I said, there's a version of my life you all believe in. I paused. And then there's the truth. The room grew still. I could feel it, the tension, the uncertainty, the first flicker of unease. Good. They were finally paying attention. I said quietly, it's time you heard the full story. I looked at each of them, one by one. Really looked. Memories flashed through my mind. Birthday parties, scraped knees, sleepless nights, sacrifices they would never fully understand. And yet here we were, strangers. Before we open this, I said, tapping the envelope lightly, you need to understand how everything began. No one moved. No one spoke. For the first time that day, I had the room exactly where I wanted it. And for the first time in years, I felt in control. I didn't open the envelope right away. I let them sit there, watching it, wondering, calculating. For once, they were the ones waiting on me, and I wasn't in a hurry to relieve that discomfort. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and let my voice settle into something quieter, steadier, something they weren't used to hearing from me. You think you know my life, I began, looking at them one by one. But what you know is only what I allowed you to see. They shifted slightly. Not dramatically, but enough for me to notice. Unease had replaced arrogance, and that alone told me I was finally being heard. When I was 27, I lost everything in a single night. I continued. Not metaphorically. Literally everything. Your father was gone, and what he left behind wasn't security. It was debt, confusion, and 3 children who needed more than I knew how to give. I paused, letting that sink in. They had heard simplified versions of this story before. Clean versions. Edited ones. The kind a mother tells so her children don't feel the weight of her struggle. This time, I wasn't editing anything. I remember standing in the kitchen the morning after the funeral. I said, my voice softer now, but stronger. There was barely any food in the house. I had no real plan. Just fear and responsibility. My oldest son looked down at the table. My daughter crossed her arms, but she didn't interrupt. That alone was new. I worked wherever I could. I went on. Jobs you never asked about. Places you never noticed. I cleaned offices at night. I stood on my feet all day serving people who didn't bother to remember my name. I took on work that followed me home, small tasks, repetitive, exhausting. Not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. I let out a slow breath. You remember the neighbor who used to watch you after school? I asked. They nodded faintly. I paid her with whatever I could manage. Sometimes money. Sometimes favors. Sometimes things I made with my own hands because I didn't have anything else to offer. The room was completely silent now. Good. But here's the part you never knew, I said, leaning forward slightly. I wasn't just surviving. I was watching, learning, planning. That word caught their attention. Planning. You see, when you have nothing, you start to understand value in a way most people never do. Every dollar mattered. Every opportunity mattered. And eventually, I realized something important. I tapped the table lightly with my finger. No one was coming to save me. I let the silence stretch again. So, I decided to save myself. My daughter shifted again, this time less defensively. There was something else in her expression now. Not guilt, not yet, but curiosity. Real curiosity. I started small, I said. Smaller than you can imagine. I saved what most people would have spent without thinking. Coins. Tips. Extra cash from long nights. It took time, a lot of time. I glanced at the envelope, but still didn't touch it. And then one day, I made a decision that changed everything. My youngest son leaned forward slightly. What decision? He asked. I met his eyes. I stopped thinking like someone who was struggling, I said. And I started thinking like someone who was building. That confused them. I could see it immediately.
Good.
I bought something. I continued. Not big. Not impressive. Something most people would overlook. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't easy. But it was mine. I didn't need to say more yet. They were already trying to piece it together. I didn't tell anyone, I added. Not friends. Not family.
Not even you.
Because I needed something that was just mine. Something that couldn't be judged, dismissed, or taken away before it had a chance to grow. I leaned back again. That first step didn't change my life overnight, I said. But it changed the direction of it. Their attention was fully locked on me now.
No phones. No interruptions. No impatience.
Just silence. I kept going, I said. Quietly.
Carefully.
One step at a time. Every small success became the foundation for the next, and every failure became a lesson I couldn't afford to ignore. I smiled faintly, though there was no humor in it. You were growing up during all of this, I added. Living your lives, going to school, making friends, and you thought your mother was just getting by. I let that hang there. That was intentional. My daughter frowned slightly. Why wouldn't you tell us? She asked. I looked at her for a long moment before answering. Because I needed to know something, I said.
What?
I held her gaze. I needed to know who you were when you believed I had nothing to give you. That landed harder than anything else I had said. I could see it in their faces. That was the truth they weren't prepared for. I watched. I continued quietly. Years passed and I watched. I listened to the way you spoke to me, the way you treated me, the assumptions you made. My voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. You didn't think I noticed, but I did. No one moved. No one spoke. I heard the impatience, I said, the subtle comments, the way conversations changed when money came up, the way visits became less frequent unless you needed something. My oldest son swallowed hard. That's not, he started. It is, I said, calmly but firmly.
He stopped.
I didn't say anything. I went on. Not because I didn't see it, but because I was still hoping I was wrong. That was the closest I came to emotion.
Hope.
A mistake I wouldn't repeat. I reached for the envelope again, this time actually lifting it slightly. For years, I said, I built something in silence. Something real. Something stable. Something that didn't depend on anyone's approval. Their eyes followed the movement of my hand. And today, I added, you laughed at me.
No anger.
Just fact. That told me everything I needed to know. The room felt different now. Heavier. More serious. The kind of silence that forces people to think whether they want to or not. I placed the envelope back down, but closer to them this time. You thought this meeting was about dividing what little I have, I said. I shook my head slightly. It's not. They were completely still now, waiting, and finally ready. I let a small pause pass before speaking again. This, I said, tapping the envelope once more, is where the real story begins. I finally opened the envelope. Not dramatically. Not with anger or hesitation. Just a simple motion, calm, deliberate, controlled. The kind of movement that comes from someone who has already made peace with what's about to happen. Papers slid onto the table in a neat stack. For a moment, no one touched them. They just stared. This, I said, my voice even, is what I've been building all these years. My oldest son was the first to reach forward. His confidence hadn't returned, but instinct pushed him anyway. He picked up the top document, his eyes scanning quickly at first, then slowing, then stopping completely. What is this? He murmured. I didn't answer immediately. I let him read. Let him understand. Keep going, I said quietly. My daughter leaned in next, grabbing another sheet. My youngest followed, and within seconds the table transformed from a place of judgment into something else entirely, something closer to disbelief. These are property records, my son said, his voice tightening. Yes. He flipped to the next page. And the next. And this is registered under? A company, I said. One I created a long time ago. They looked up at me almost in unison. You, my daughter asked, as if the idea itself didn't quite fit in her mind. Yes, I replied simply. Silence fell again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one was heavier, sharper, filled with the sound of their assumptions collapsing. There are multiple properties listed here, my youngest said, his voice quieter now. Different locations, different types. Yes. How many? My daughter asked. I tilted my head slightly. Enough. That answer didn't satisfy them. I could see it immediately. They wanted numbers. Certainty. Something they could measure. So I gave it to them. 15, I said. No one spoke. 15 income-generating properties, I continued. Residential, commercial, mixed use. Spread across different areas. Managed quietly, carefully. My oldest son dropped the paper back onto the table like it had suddenly become too heavy. That's not possible, he said under his breath. It is, I replied. This account, my daughter whispered, holding up another page. These numbers, this isn't accurate. I finished for her. It is. Her eyes flicked between the paper and my face. But how? She asked. That question lingered in the air longer than any of the others.
How?
Not disbelief anymore. Understanding. Or at least the beginning of it. I told you, I said, leaning back slightly. I was planning. They stared at me like they were seeing someone else entirely. Good. You assumed I was barely managing, I continued. That I was struggling. That everything I had was visible, obvious, small. I shook my head slowly. You never asked what I was doing with my time, where I was going, why I made certain decisions. My son ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly now. This is serious money, he said. This isn't just savings. This is an entire portfolio. Yes. And you just never told us? I looked at him calmly. Would it have changed anything? He opened his mouth, then closed it.
Exactly.
My daughter sat back, her earlier confidence completely gone. We thought, she started, but didn't finish. I know what you thought, I said. There was no anger in my voice. That made it worse for them. You thought I was dependent, I continued. That eventually everything would pass to you. That all you had to do was wait. I let the words settle. You thought I had nothing. Silence. The kind that forces people to confront themselves. My youngest picked up another document, his hands slightly unsteady. This property, he said, pointing. Do you realize what this is worth? Yes. He looked up. Do you? I had it evaluated recently, I said.
So yes.
He didn't ask for the number. He didn't need to. They all understood now. The shift in the room was complete. Where there had been arrogance, there was now tension. Where there had been dismissal, there was now attention, intense, focused, almost desperate. Why? My daughter asked suddenly. Her voice wasn't sharp anymore. It was something else. Why didn't you tell us? She repeated. I looked at her carefully. Because I needed to know something, I said again. Her eyes filled slightly, not with tears yet, but with something close. Whether we cared about you? She asked. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I picked up one of the documents myself, glancing at it briefly before placing it back down. I needed to know, I said slowly, whether you valued me or what you thought I could give you. That was the moment everything truly changed. They weren't looking at the papers anymore. They were looking at me, not as a burden, not as someone fading, but as someone they had completely misunderstood. My oldest finally sat back down. "We didn't know," he said. I nodded slightly.
I'm aware.
"If we had known, you would have treated me differently," I finished. He hesitated. "Yes." I held his gaze. "And that," I said quietly, "is exactly the problem." No one argued. No one denied it. Because now they couldn't. I folded my hands again, the same way I had at the beginning of this meeting, but everything about me felt different.
Stronger. Clearer.
This wasn't just about money, I continued. It was about truth. About understanding the people closest to me without illusion. I glanced at each of them. And now I do. My daughter wiped at her eyes quickly, trying to regain control. "So what happens now?" she asked. A simple question, but not an easy one. I looked at the envelope, now empty, its contents spread across the table like pieces of a life they had never bothered to see. "Now," I said, "we deal with reality." They waited,
Every one of them.
and for the first time, they weren't waiting for money. They were waiting for my decision. I let the silence stretch just a little longer before speaking again. "Because what happens next," I said calmly, "is entirely up to me." For the first time in years, I could see uncertainty in their eyes, and not the kind that comes from confusion, but the kind that comes from losing control. They were no longer sitting across from a weak, predictable version of me. That version no longer existed. What remained was someone they had never taken the time to know. I let the silence stretch just enough to make them uncomfortable, then I stood up slowly. My body wasn't as strong as it once was, but in that moment, I felt more grounded than ever. "You asked what happens now," I said, walking toward the window. "The answer is simple." I turned back to face them. Everything changes. My oldest shifted forward. "Mom, we can fix this," he said quickly. "We didn't understand, but now we do." I shook my head slightly.
No. Irraplia.
"Now you understand the numbers." That's not the same thing. That hit harder than anything else I could have said. Because it was true. My daughter leaned in, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. "We were wrong," she said. "We said things we shouldn't have. But that doesn't mean we don't care." I watched her carefully. "You laughed," I said. She flinched. All of them did. "I want you to remember that moment clearly," I continued. "Because I will."
No anger.
Just precision. My youngest exhaled slowly. We didn't realize how it sounded. "You realized enough," I said calmly. "You just didn't care." That shut him down completely. I walked back to the table and gathered a few of the documents, aligning them neatly. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted them to watch me do it. To understand that I was in control of something they had already mentally claimed. "For years," I said, "you built a version of me in your heads. A convenient version. One that made it easy to dismiss me, to ignore me, to treat me like something temporary." I looked up, and I allowed it. That surprised them. "Yes," I continued. "I allowed it because I needed to see how far it would go. I needed the truth, even if it hurt." My oldest rubbed his temples. "So this was a test?" he asked. "No," I said. "This was reality. You just failed to see it." My daughter's voice trembled slightly. "So, what are you saying? That none of this matters anymore?" I studied her face. "It matters," I said. "Just not in the way you think." They waited, tense, alert. "I spent decades building something meaningful," I continued. "Not just financially, but personally.
Discipline.
Patience. Independence. Things none of you ever asked about." I paused. But somewhere along the way, I realized something even more important. I leaned forward slightly. Money doesn't reveal people. They frowned. It exposes them. That sat heavily in the room. You didn't become this way because of what you saw today, I added. You were already this way. Today just made it impossible to hide. My youngest looked down at his hands. My oldest avoided my eyes. My daughter blinked quickly, holding back something she didn't want to show.
Good.
Let them feel it. So here's what happens now, I said, my voice steady. All of them looked up immediately. I'm not dividing anything, I said. The words landed like a final verdict. What? My oldest asked. You heard me. My daughter shook her head. That doesn't make sense. This is family. That's what this is for. I tilted my head slightly. Is it? She froze. For years, you treated me like an obligation. I continued. Something to manage, something to eventually replace, something to outlive. Her lips parted, but no words came out. And now, I said, you're talking about family? The room went silent again.
Different this time.
Heavier. Final. My oldest stood up suddenly. So, what? You're just cutting us out, he asked. After everything? I met his gaze calmly. After everything, I repeated. Exactly. He stared at me, searching for something, emotion, hesitation, weakness. He didn't find it. That's not fair, my youngest muttered. I almost smiled. Fair, I said. You want to talk about fair now? No one answered. I gave you everything I could when it mattered. I continued.
Time.
Energy. Support. Sacrifice. And in return, I asked for very little. I let that settle. Respect would have been enough. My daughter finally broke. Tears slipped down her face, quiet but real. We're sorry, she whispered. I looked at her. I believe you, I said. That surprised her. But that doesn't change anything. Her shoulders dropped. Why? She asked. Because apology doesn't erase truth, I replied. I walked toward the door slowly, not to leave, but to make a point. This isn't about punishment, I said. It's about clarity. They followed me with their eyes. For the first time in a long time, I continued, I see things exactly as they are.
No illusions. No expectations.
I opened the door slightly, letting in a bit of fresh air. And I'm not going back. My oldest spoke again, but this time his voice was quieter. So that's it, he asked. I turned back to them.
For now, I said.
They didn't move,
Didn't argue.
didn't push further, because deep down they understood. Not everything, but enough. I walked back to the table one last time and placed the documents back into the envelope, sealing it with a calm, deliberate motion. This meeting is over, I said. No raised voice.
No anger.
Just finality. They stood up slowly, one by one, like people leaving a place they knew they wouldn't return to the same way again. As my daughter passed me, she hesitated. Is there any way to fix this? She asked quietly. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I answered honestly. I don't know. And that was the truth. They left without another word. The door closed behind them with a soft click. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt peaceful. I stood there for a moment, alone in the room where everything had finally been revealed. Then I exhaled slowly. Not in relief, not in sadness, but in certainty, because whatever came next would be on my terms. 3 days passed before I heard from any of them. 3 quiet, uninterrupted days where my phone didn't ring, my door didn't knock, and no one asked me for anything. I didn't realize how heavy that constant expectation had been until it was gone. The silence wasn't empty, it was clean. It gave me space to think, to breathe, to exist without being watched, judged, or calculated. I spent those days slowly, deliberately. I woke up without rushing, made my coffee the way I liked it, and sat by the window longer than usual. I noticed small things, the way the light shifted across the floor, the faint sounds outside, the stillness inside my own home. It felt unfamiliar at first. Then it started to feel like something I should have had all along. By the fourth morning, I was ready, not for them, but for what came next. I had already begun making decisions long before that meeting at the table. The envelope had been one step. What followed was something far more permanent. I sat at my desk and opened a second folder, thicker, more detailed, more final. Everything was there. Transfers,
Sales.
authorizations, choices. I had spent years building carefully. Now I was dismantling just as carefully, but this time with intention. I picked up the phone and made a call. Yes, I said calmly when the line connected. I'm ready to proceed. There was no hesitation in my voice. No doubt. Just clarity. The first step had already been completed weeks ago. A few of the smaller properties, ones that required constant attention, had been quietly sold. Clean transactions.
No complications. No noise.
The funds had been moved into accounts that existed far outside the reach of anyone who had ever assumed they would one day belong to them. No one noticed. No one asked. And that told me everything. Now came the next stage. Larger decisions. More visible ones. The kind that couldn't be ignored once they were complete. I spent that entire day reviewing everything one last time, not because I wasn't sure, but because I wanted to feel the weight of it fully. Every document represented years of effort, discipline, sacrifice. Letting go of parts of it wasn't easy, but holding on to it for the wrong reasons would have been worse. By the evening, it was done.
Signed. Filed.
Irreversible. I didn't feel regret. I felt lighter. The next morning, the phone finally rang. I didn't need to check the screen to know who it was. I let it ring twice before answering.
Hello, I said.
Mom. My daughter's voice came through immediately, tight, controlled, but fragile underneath. We need to talk. I leaned back in my chair. We already did. Not like this, she said quickly. Things have changed. I almost smiled. Yes, I said. They have. There was a pause. We've been looking into everything, she continued. The properties, the company, all of it. We didn't realize. I know, I said, cutting her off gently. You've said that already. Another pause. This one longer. Some of them are gone, she said finally. There it was. I closed my eyes briefly, not from stress, but from recognition. Yes, I said. You sold them? She asked, her voice rising slightly despite her effort to stay calm. I did. Why would you do that without telling us? She demanded. I opened my eyes. Because they're mine. Silence. The kind that hits harder than any argument. We thought, she started, then stopped. I know what you thought, I replied. Her breathing was uneven now. Not dramatic, just real. That was part of what we were going to inherit, she said quietly. I didn't raise my voice. You were never entitled to anything, I said. That hurt her. I could hear it, but I didn't soften it, because truth doesn't need softening. So that's it, she asked. You're just giving everything away? Selling it? Deciding on your own? Yes. And we don't get a say?
No.
Another long silence. Then more quietly. Why? I stood up and walked toward the window, looking out at the street I had lived on for so many years. Because for the first time, I said slowly, I'm making decisions that aren't influenced by what anyone expects from me. I could hear her trying to steady herself. We're your family, she said. I nodded. even though she couldn't see me. Yes, I said. You are. And that doesn't matter? It does, I replied. Just not in the way you think. She didn't understand that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. We were wrong, she said again, softer this time. We said things we didn't mean. I turned away from the window. No, I said. You meant them. You just didn't think they would matter.
She didn't respond.
Because she couldn't. After a moment, she asked the question I knew was coming. Is there anything left? I let the silence stretch before answering. Yes, I said.
Hope.
I could hear it instantly in her breath. How much? She asked. I closed my eyes again just for a second. Enough, I replied. That word again. The same one I had used before. And just like before, it frustrated her. Enough for what? She pressed. I opened my eyes. Enough for me, I said. That was the answer she didn't want, because it had nothing to do with her. We just want to understand, she said.
No, y replica calmly.
You want to adjust. She went quiet again, and this time she stayed that way. I'll be making a few more changes, I added. You'll hear about them soon enough. What kind of changes? She asked quickly. I hesitated, not because I was unsure, but because I knew what those words would do. Final ones, I said. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. Mom, please don't shut us out completely. I stood there for a moment thinking, not about money, not about property, but about distance, about everything that had already been lost long before this conversation. I'm not shutting you out, I said quietly. You already did that. She started crying then, not loudly, not dramatically, just breaking. I didn't interrupt. I didn't comfort. I simply listened, because sometimes silence says more than anything else. After a while, she spoke again. Are you coming back? She asked. I looked around the room. My home, my space, my life. I'm still here, I said, but even as I said it, I knew something had already changed. Not physically, but permanently. And she felt it too, because she didn't ask anything else. The line stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then she hung up. I lowered the phone slowly and placed it on the table.
No anger, no sadness.
Just clarity. I walked back to my desk and opened the folder again. There was one last section left. The most important one. The one that would make everything unmistakably clear. I picked up the pen.
And signed.
I signed the final document without hesitation. The ink dried quickly, but the weight of what it represented settled much deeper. This wasn't just another decision, it was the last one that mattered. Everything else had already been set in motion. Transfers completed. Sales finalized. Structures rearranged. But this was the line that couldn't be crossed back over. I closed the folder slowly and rested my hand on top of it for a moment, as if acknowledging the years behind it. Not just the work, but the patience, the restraint, the quiet endurance that had shaped every step of my life. Then I stood up. The house felt different now, not because anything had physically changed, but because I had. The walls didn't carry the same expectations anymore. The air didn't feel heavy. It felt neutral, honest. I walked into the living room and sat down in my usual chair, the one they had always said I should replace. Funny how something so simple had become a symbol of everything they didn't understand. They saw old furniture. I saw stability. They saw something outdated. I saw something that had stayed. A few hours passed before the knock came. I didn't rush to the door. I knew who it was. When I opened it, all three of them were standing there again. But this time, there was no impatience, no arrogance, no performance. Just tension. Real, visible tension. Mom, my oldest said quietly. I stepped aside and let them in without a word. They moved differently now, slower, more aware, as if the space itself demanded respect they had never given it before. We sat down, same positions, same room, but nothing felt the same. You made more changes, my youngest said, breaking the silence. Yes. He swallowed. We heard. Of course they had. News travels fast when money is involved. My daughter looked at me, her eyes red but steady. Is it true, she asked, about where everything is going? I met her gaze. Yes. She closed her eyes briefly. My oldest leaned forward. You didn't leave anything for us? He asked. I didn't answer immediately. Not because I needed time, but because I wanted them to sit with the question. Finally, I spoke. I left you exactly what you valued me at, I said. The words landed harder this time, because now they fully understood them. That's not fair, he said again, but there was no strength behind it anymore. I shook my head slightly. It's accurate. Silence filled the room once more, but this silence was different from all the others. It wasn't tense. It wasn't explosive. It was final. My daughter spoke next, her voice quieter than I had ever heard it. We didn't think you would actually do it, she said. I know, I replied. That doesn't mean we don't care about you, she added quickly. I studied her face. Then why did it take this for you to show it? I asked. She didn't have an answer. None of them did, because there wasn't one. My youngest leaned back, exhaling slowly. So what happens now? He asked. I looked at each of them carefully. Now, I said, you live your lives. They frowned slightly, confused by the simplicity. And you? My oldest asked. I leaned back in my chair. I do the same. That's it, he pressed. Yes. No conditions.
No negotiations.
No reopening of doors that had already been closed. My daughter's voice trembled slightly. Are we just done? She asked. I didn't rush to answer, because this was the only question that actually mattered. I don't hate you, I said. She looked up, surprised. I don't even resent you, I continued. What I feel is clarity. The words seemed to confuse them more than anything else. I spent years trying to be enough, I said. Enough to be respected. Enough to be appreciated. Enough to be seen. I paused. And now I understand something I should have realized a long time ago. They waited. I don't need to earn what should have been given freely. That was the truth they couldn't argue with, because it had nothing to do with money, everything to do with value. My oldest looked down at his hands. We can change, he said quietly. I believe you, I replied. He looked up, surprised again. But that change isn't for me, I added. It's for you. The room went still. I'm not closing the door completely, I said. But I'm not holding it open anymore either. They processed that slowly,
Carefully.
painfully. You'll have to decide what kind of relationship you want, I continued. And more importantly, why. My daughter wiped her face. And if we try? She asked. I looked at her for a long moment. Then we start from zero, I said.
No expectations. No assumptions. No entitlement.
She nodded faintly. It wasn't relief, but it was something. They stayed for a while longer, but the conversation didn't go much further. There was nothing left to argue about. Nothing left to defend. Everything had already been said, both today and long before it. Eventually, they stood up to leave. This time, there were no dramatic words. No desperate attempts to reverse what had been done. Just quiet acceptance. At the door, my daughter paused again. Do you regret any of this? She asked. I thought about it. Not quickly. Not emotionally. But honestly. No, I said. She nodded, as if she expected that answer. Then they left. The door closed behind them one last time. I stood there for a moment, listening to the silence that followed. not heavy, not empty.
Just mine.
I walked back into the living room and sat down again, letting the stillness settle around me. For years, I thought strength meant holding everything together, enduring, sacrificing, waiting. I was wrong. Strength is knowing when to stop, when to step back, when to choose yourself without guilt. I looked around the room, at the life I had built piece by piece, quietly, without recognition. And for the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt free. My name is Evelyn, and this is the story of the moment I stopped waiting to be valued and decided to value myself instead.